1 year ago, this wasn't close. In 2025, Charles Leclerc out-qualified Lewis Hamilton nearly 4 times out of 5, and Hamilton didn't score a single Grand Prix podium for Ferrari all season. So how, 12 months later, is it Hamilton starting on the front row in Barcelona, while Leclerc crashes out of qualifying for the second Saturday in a row? The car is the same, the garage is the same. Something between these two drivers has flipped completely. Start with the result, because the result is the cleanest piece of proof there is. Saturday at the Circuit de Barcelona, Catalunya. George Russell takes pole for Mercedes with a 1 minute 14.679. The second name on the timing screen is Lewis Hamilton in a Ferrari, a 1 minute 14.743. The gap between them is 64 thousandths of a second. 600ths. Less time than it takes to blink. That is the first Grand Prix front row start Hamilton has taken since he walked into Ferrari. Behind him, Kimi Antonelli 3rd, Lando Norris 4th, Max Verstappen 5th, Isaac Hadjar 6th, Oscar Piastri 7th. A McLaren, a Red Bull, both works Mercedes drivers other than the one on pole, all of them slower than the older Ferrari driver everyone spent last season writing off. And look at how tightly packed the front of that grid was. From pole down to 5th, the whole spread was barely 0.3 of a second. Hamilton sat 64 thousandths off the top in a field where the first 5 cars were split by almost nothing. Then the timing screen falls off a cliff. The gap back to 8th place was nearly 2 full seconds. The drivers who got it right on that messy final run were in a different world to the ones who did not, and Hamilton was right at the sharp end of the ones who got it right. His lap was not a toe-assisted fluke or a slipstream gift. It was one of the real laps of the day. And the other Ferrari? The other Ferrari is in the wall. Charles Leclerc qualified 10th. He set no time in the final part of qualifying, because before he could set one, he put his car nose first into the tyre barrier at turn 4. Red flag, session stopped, the medical car sent out. The hit was hard enough to bring that medical car out on its own. He climbed out unhurt, and when his engineer came on the radio to check on him, the reply came back as a single, flat word. Okay, that was it. Look at how that final session really unfolded, because the order matters. Leclerc's crash brought out the red flag with 8.5 minutes still on the clock, and at that point, barely anyone had a lap on the board. Only Piastri and Verstappen had set times, Piastri sitting on a 1 minute 15.176 that would look like a lifetime ago by the time the flag flew. Everything else still had to happen. When the session started again, the track had chewed through its tyres, fresh rubber was thin on the ground, and the drivers had one real shot to get it right. Russell put in a stand-in pole. Antonelli briefly went quickest. Then Russell hit back with the lap that took pole for good, and on his final try, Hamilton jumped up to second. He pulled out that lap in the messiest, highest-pressure version of qualifying there is, with the clock against him and one chance to land it. And here is what makes that lap stand out even more. Hamilton did not look like a front-row car earlier in the weekend. He sat out the first practice session for good, handing his Ferrari to the rookie Dino Beganovic. In final practice, he was 4 to 5 tenths off the pace. On paper, he was the second Ferrari heading into qualifying, the one with work to do. Then qualifying started, and he topped the very first part of it, carried that form through every segment, and ended up on the front row. A weekend that started slow turned into his best Saturday in red. Now look at the other Ferrari, because Leclerc was not the slow one this weekend. For most of the Barcelona weekend, he was the fast one. 3rd in final practice, quickest of the 2 Ferraris in the second part of qualifying. This is a track he knows as well as any on the calendar, a place where he has always been strong, and he arrived at the session looking like the Ferrari driver most likely to fight for pole. Then, on his first flying lap in the top 10 shootout, he tried to carry a little more speed into the long right-hander at turn 4. The rear of the car stepped out. He slid onto the dirtier line off the racing groove, lost the rear completely, and speared into the barrier. No time on the board. 10th on the grid. And 0.6 of a second up the timing screen, his teammate banked the lap that put him on the front row. So that is the snapshot. One Ferrari, the older driver, the one supposedly past his best, on the front row of the grid. The other Ferrari, the younger man, the one who was supposed to be the future, in the gravel for the second Saturday running. To see how strange that is, you have to look at where these two were standing 12 months ago. Rewind to 2025, Hamilton's first season in red. It was one of the worst years of his career. Across the whole season, he failed to finish on the podium at a single Grand Prix. Not one. Leclerc beat him in qualifying the large majority of the time, somewhere close to 19 times across the season. A beating so one-sided that the question stopped being whether Hamilton could match Leclerc and became whether the move to Ferrari had been a mistake. Leclerc was the bar. Hamilton was chasing shadows. That is the starting point. That is the version of this team-up that everyone had in their heads coming into 2026. And it is the version that Saturday in Barcelona just tore up. Because this is no longer one bad weekend for Leclerc. This is a pattern, and the pattern has a date stamp on it. Go back exactly 7 days to Monaco. Leclerc topped the first practice session at his home race. He looked, again, like the quicker Ferrari. And in the final part of qualifying, he waved off his first run after a slide at Massenet, briefly went quickest on his second, and then on his final flying lap, he clipped the barrier at Tabac, snapped the rear, and ended his session against the wall. He qualified fourth. And look at who was right ahead of him on that Monaco grid. Hamilton, third, 2/10 up the road. The exact order at the front read Antonelli on a 1 minute 12.051, Verstappen on a 12.094, Hamilton on a 12.279, and then Leclerc on a 12.351. Hamilton beat Leclerc at Monaco too. A bit of dirty air had unsettled the rear of Leclerc's car on the way in, and it cost him the wall. Then the next day, in the race, on a safety car restart, he crashed again. 2 crashes in 2 days at his home Grand Prix. So when Leclerc went into the barrier at turn 4 inches Barcelona, it was not a one-off mistake. It was the second qualifying Saturday in a row that ended with his Ferrari damaged and his lap unfinished. Same outcome, different corner, 7 days apart. That is the part that stopped people calling this a fluke. And afterward, Leclerc did not hide from it. There were no excuses. It was a mistake, a case of carrying more speed in and losing the rear on the dirty side of the track. Then came something heavier. He felt ashamed. Ashamed to stand in front of the camera after another what if. Ashamed of letting down the people who keep backing him. That is not the voice of a driver having a quiet wobble. That is a driver who knows the pattern looks bad and knows exactly how it looks. Now, the obvious place to point the finger is the car. Same garage, same machine, so if one driver is on the front row and the other is in the wall, the difference has to be the drivers, right? Not so fast. Because there is a mechanical side story running underneath this, and it is the reason the crash is even more telling than it first looks. For weeks, the braking on Leclerc's car had been all over the place, going back to Canada. He had been fighting it hard, the trouble tied to tyre heat and something else nobody could fully pin down, to the point where he could not be sure what the car would do from one lap to the next. For a driver braking on the edge into corners like turn 4, not knowing exactly how the car is going to act under braking is close to the worst spot you can be in. And there is a reason that trouble bites one Ferrari harder than the other. The SF26 works in a narrow tyre heat window. Get the tyres into the right band and the car comes alive. Slip outside it, even a little, and the grip falls away, and the rear goes light at exactly the wrong moment, on the way into a corner, under braking. Hamilton has spent the season learning to keep the car inside that window. Leclerc has spent the last 2 Saturdays getting caught on the wrong edge of it, and the wrong edge of that window is a barrier. So Ferrari did something about it. For Barcelona, Leclerc switched his brake discs from Brembo to Carbone Industry, and here is the detail that matters. That is the exact same brake maker Hamilton had already moved to weeks earlier. Leclerc copied his teammate's setup, the one Hamilton had been running while quietly stacking up the better qualifying results. New discs. The same package as the front row Ferrari, and he still crashed. That is the moment the brake theory runs out of road, because Leclerc himself would not blame the discs. After putting it in the barrier on the very weekend he took on Hamilton's brake setup, the one thing he would not do was point at the brakes. He called it a mistake and left it there. Which means the gap that opened up at turn 4 was not a parts gap. Both cars had the same brakes. One driver found the limit, the other went past it. If you want to see exactly where that limit lives, look at the data from that corner, because both Ferraris ran nearly the same setup in qualifying, and that makes the comparison unusually clean. On the data, Hamilton had been braking very late into turn 4. Late, all in, on the edge, but on the right side of it. Leclerc, into the same corner, tried to carry a lot more speed, and it did not work out. Same setup, same brakes, same corner. One driver braked late and held it. The other carried the speed and lost the rear. The whole difference between a front row lap and a barrier came down to how each man got into one right-hand turn. It is worth looking at the other end of Hamilton's lap too, the part where he lost pole, rather than where his teammate lost the car, because it tells you how fine these margins were. Through the first two sectors of that final lap, Hamilton was actually ahead of Russell. He had pole in his hands with a third of the lap to go. Where Russell took it back was in the final sector. The Mercedes turned in later at turn 10, set up better for the run to the line, and got on the throttle earlier out of the last corner. That stretch, the last few turns, is where 64 thousandths went. Hamilton did not lose pole because the Ferrari was half a second slow. He lost it in the final corner, by a margin you could measure in a heartbeat, in a car that gives away straight-line speed to the Mercedes every single lap. If you are finding this breakdown useful, and you want the data behind the Ferrari story every single week, take a second and subscribe. This channel lives in the details most coverage skips, because what comes next is the part that turns one Saturday into a whole season. And this is where the weekend stops being a single data point and becomes a trend, because turn 4 inches Barcelona is not the first time the numbers have favoured Hamilton this year. Go back to Canada. In qualifying there, Hamilton beat Leclerc in the sprint by 84 thousandths and in the main session by just over a tenth. But the raw gap is not the interesting part. The interesting part is that across that whole Canada weekend, through every part of qualifying running, all 6 of them, Hamilton was the faster Ferrari in every single one. Not 1 or 2 sessions, not a lucky lap, but every single part of qualifying running that weekend. That is not luck. That is a driver pulling more out of the same car, over and over. Stack that up, and the season-long picture starts to come clear. In 2025, the qualifying head-to-head was a blowout in Leclerc's favour, close to 19-5 at Grand Prix weekends. In 2026, it flipped. By the time the cars reached Monaco, that Grand Prix qualifying head-to-head had levelled out, and the gaps between the two had shrunk to almost nothing, hundredths on average. Then came Monaco, where Hamilton beat Leclerc again. Then Barcelona, where Hamilton beat him a third weekend running, while Leclerc never set a time at all. A head-to-head that was a blowout one way is now leaning the other way. And it is not only Saturdays. On Sundays, the race results tell the same story. Hamilton has the better of the race head-to-head this season too, and he has done it with results, not just laps. Back-to-back second places, in Canada and again in Monaco. While Leclerc was crashing out of his home race, Hamilton was on the podium. The driver who could not crack the top 3 even once in 2025 has been picking up runner-up finishes while his teammate picks up damage reports. The championship table ties all of this together, the thing that actually decides who the lead driver is. After Monaco, with the points settled, Hamilton sits second in the standings on 90 points. Leclerc sits fourth on 75. The driver who was written off after 2025 is now 15 points clear of the man who beat him almost every Saturday last year, inside the same team, in the same car. That is not a qualifying quirk or a one-lap fluke. That is a full season of results, adding up in one direction. Stop and think how strange that sentence is. 12 months ago, Hamilton scored 0 Grand Prix podiums for Ferrari and lost qualifying nearly 4 times out of 5. Today, he is on the front row, ahead in the points, and the faster of the 2 Ferraris on most Saturdays. The same 2 drivers, the same red cars, a complete reversal. So, the real question is not whether the gap exists. The table answers that. The real question is why it exists. And the most interesting answers point in 2 directions. The first is the car. The 2026 Ferrari, the SF26, is a different machine to drive than last year's, and it fits Hamilton's natural style more than it fits Leclerc's. The second is less about driving and more about belonging. Hamilton now knows the team in a way he simply did not a year ago. He knows exactly which people to ask for which information. The bonds and the structure that take time to learn inside a team like Ferrari have finally clicked for him. A year ago, Hamilton was a new arrival working out where everything was. Now he is wired into the whole machine. Inside Ferrari, the view is the same. Hamilton made a real step over the winter. He fits in far better than he did. And the version of Hamilton driving in 2026 is working on a different level to the one who struggled through 2025. Even Hamilton had guessed wrong on how long that settling in would take. Now that it has happened, the lap times are following. There is one more layer to all of this, and it changes what Hamilton's front row actually means. Because for all the noise about the Ferrari versus Ferrari battle, neither of these drivers is fighting for the championship right now. Mercedes has won every race so far this season. Kimi Antonelli leads the standings, and he leads it with room to spare. After Canada, he was already more than 40 points clear of Russell, his own teammate, never mind the Ferraris. The Ferrari is a strong body, quick through the slow and medium-speed corners, but it carries an engine deficit to Mercedes of something like 30 horsepower. And under the 2026 energy rules, that deficit costs Ferrari most on the straights. On the wrong track, that is worth a little over half a second a lap. Ferrari brought a big upgrade package to Barcelona, around 8 new parts, to try to claw some of that back, worth maybe 0.2 a lap. So Hamilton's front row sits in context. Russell was still ahead on pole. The Mercedes engine still had the edge where it counts. What Hamilton did was drag a car with a straight-line weakness to within 64 thousandths of pole on a day his teammate could not finish a lap. The fight he is winning is not for the title. It is the fight inside his own garage, the one that decides which Ferrari driver leads the team. And that fight, the one everyone thought was settled in Leclerc's favour before the season even started, has swung the other way. How strange the weekend was did not stop with Ferrari either. Down at the other end of the grid, Lance Stroll beat Fernando Alonso in qualifying for the first time in more than 40 races. And Alonso, a two-time world champion at his home Grand Prix, started at the very back of the grid. Barcelona was a Saturday where the usual order got turned upside down up and down the field. At the front of it, the most upside-down order of all was inside the red cars. Which brings us back to where we started, except now the picture is sharper. The front row lap, the barrier, the 15-point gap in the table, the 3 qualifying weekends in a row, the back-to-back podiums, the same brakes, the same setup, the same corner that one driver nailed and the other could not. Put all of it on the screen at once and the case gets hard to argue with. On the proof we have right now, in 2026, Hamilton is the faster, steadier, higher-placed Ferrari driver. Now, none of that means the season is decided. Leclerc has the track record. He has spent years as Ferrari's bar to clear. He was quicker than Hamilton across the whole of last season, and the moment he sorts out the on-off trouble that has hit his last 2 Saturdays, this fight could swing again just as fast as it swung the first time. Even with Hamilton looking this strong, the belief that Leclerc bounces back before the season is out has not gone away. He has not lost the inside battle across these last 2 races, without people still believing he can win the war. And a closer fight pushes both drivers to find more. That is the open question this story leaves hanging. But open questions get answered on track, and right now the track is answering in Hamilton's favour. The data from Barcelona did not lie. The data from Canada did not lie. The championship table does not lie. For one driver, the move to Ferrari is finally paying off in the only thing that matters in this sport, which is lap time. For the other, the next few weekends just became the most important of his season, because a benchmark that loses its own inside battle 2 weeks running has something to prove, and the clock is already running. This was never really a story about one crash at one corner. It is a story about how fast a pecking order can flip inside the most watched team in the sport, and how the driver written off 12 months ago became the one setting the standard. If you want the data behind every twist of the Ferrari season as it happens, subscribe and stick around. The next chapter is already being written.